Hey, welcome to the MongoDB podcast. I'm Nick Raboy, and I'm with my co-host Mike Lynn. And in this episode, we're going to be interviewing Mark Porter, the CTO of MongoDB. So Mark actually has a very fascinating story about his life in technology, his experiences working at very popular companies such as Oracle and even NASA, and then what actually brought him to MongoDB. By the end of this episode, you should have a better idea on who Mark Porter is and even have some inspiration in regards to growing your career in technology. We hope you enjoy the show.
The only constant in software is change.
Software, data, and all things MongoDB. Welcome to the MongoDB podcast with your hosts, Michael Lynn and Nick Raboy. Okay, Mark Porter, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on. How are you doing today?
It's great to be here today. I am doing great.
Fantastic. So, a lot of folks listening may not know who you are. It'd be great if you start us out with an introduction. Who's Mark Porter?
So I am currently the CTO of MongoDB. I'm also the father of five, and I've been married for over 20 years. And I've worked at Oracle, I've worked at NASA, and I've worked at a bunch of other places. I am relentlessly a technical dweeb, and I'm proud of it.
That's great. A technical dweeb. I love it. And I love the fact that when you introduce yourself, you talk about the fact that you're a father. I'm a father myself, and it's an important part of my life. I think I take that with me in everything I do. So tell us about your journey as a technologist. You're obviously the CTO at MongoDB, a massively fast-growing, great place to work. But what got you here? Tell us about your journey as a technologist.
So I was always entranced by puzzles when I was a young kid. And way back when in 1975, 76, 77, I got involved in electronics. And after that, I ended up buying this 4K TRS-80 computer and programming it in BASIC. And I loved it. And it got me hooked on puzzles. And the idea of a computer is that, you're trying to get it to do something of value, and you have to get all the steps right. And so that has just slowly taken me through my entire career, where the puzzles have just changed over time. So first the puzzles were, getting this little 4K computer to play games. And, in my current role, it's shepherding the technology and organization and culture of a multi-thousand person company along with the rest of the e-staff. And I love it, but it's still just a puzzle, just a different kind.
Yeah, I love it. It's a technologist's mindset for sure. And today we have platforms for young programmers and young minds like Scratch, which is a great resource. My nephews are involved in programming on Scratch and Roblox. Um, what did you begin your programming journey with?
So I began my programming journey with BASIC on that TRS-80, and then I also got into Z80 assembler, which I'm going to tell you just recently I was rereading a book on Z80 assembler, and I think it's a great language. It has very simple register assignments. When you look at the chips of today, like the Intel thing, I think they've gotten way overcomplicated. Um, and then I started working on other platforms, and the next platform I worked on, surprisingly, was a 64K HP 41 CV calculator. And on that calculator, I worked with the Alaska Department of Energy, and I wrote a program which allowed someone to go around their house and type in their windows and their doors and whether they were single pane glass or double pane glass. And then this little program would go and it would chew for like 45 minutes, and it would spit out this very long ticker tape, because the printers back then were on silver foil, and it actually burned the printing into the silver foil. And it would print out this long ticker tape of what you could do with the $1,000 Alaska credit to improve your house. And so people would take this long silver roll of tape to the Alaska Department of Energy, and they'd get approval, and then they'd go to a contractor and they'd get their house energy improved. And I was so excited about this program because it helped a couple hundred households, at least while I was using it. It helped a couple hundred households have better energy savings.
That's incredible. And how old were you at that time?
Let's see. I was a freshman in high school. So how old are you when you're a freshman in high school? Like 16, 17?
Yeah, about that for sure. I also know that you've worked at a number of really large companies like Oracle, Amazon. Tell us what it's like going from a company like that to a smaller startup type culture, maybe like at Grab and even at MongoDB to a large degree.
It's been an interesting journey. So the very first company I worked for as a real company was a construction management company up in Alaska. And it was like 12 of us and four of us were programmers. And I love that culture. I love just getting in and doing what needed to get done. There was no process. There was no overhead. And then I went to NASA. And while I was at Caltech, I worked over at JPL, and wow, there was a lot of process and overhead. And but it was all good, and we were doing real science, and it was fun, and the people there were just so earnest about what they were doing. And then you mentioned I worked at a couple other big companies, and one of them was Oracle. And one of the things I loved about Oracle is even though it was a big company, they were relentlessly in pursuit of technical perfection. That was it. And if it took 3 more years to get the database out, but it was the right database, it was that's what they would do. And then I'll compare and contrast that with AWS, where AWS, it's about getting the release out. It's about delighting customers with whatever you can get out next quarter. And we take on a lot of technical debt at AWS. We do a lot of things in order to serve the customer just as quickly as possible. So all of those different things put together showed me that there's a lot of different ways to get things done at companies. And when you go to a new company, the advice I'd give someone is listen for your first 30, 60 days. Listen to what they value, listen to how they make decisions.
That's great advice. Nick, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I'd actually like to jump into some of your career history. So, I mean, other than MongoDB, of course, where did you have the most fun in your technical career? What company? Would you say it was Oracle or?
Oh, that's hard. I've had fun every place I've worked. But I'll give you a couple fun incidents. One was in 1993, Oracle decided to enter the interactive video business. And one of the most fun things about that was we were on a flight over to see British Telecom, and we were selling our video server. Now, it's really important to note that not a single line of code had been written for the video server. And we were going over to a major telco to sell it. And on the way over, this is long before the internet, my friend Bill and I, we had this 3-inch thick MPEG spec. And the goal was that by the time we landed in London, we had to be experts on digital video. And we were, and we sold the contract to British Telecom, and it worked really well. Unfortunately, we then spent the next 3 years working 7 days a week, catching up with the promises we'd made and delivering those products. We built a team of over 100 people, and it was just incredible getting a bunch of people together, taking all process constraints away, and just saying, get stuff done. And it was one of my favorite times in my career. Even though we were working 7 days a week and sleeping under our desks and all those things, it was still the most fun time we've ever had. In fact, we recently had a reunion of about 50 of us 27 years later, and we still remember that time as the best time in our careers.
It's fantastic.
So, um, there's a lot of folks that may not know how you take the reins of a company like MongoDB, and what are some of the things that you're looking at initially as, you mentioned you're going to listen initially, and I love that. Kind of see the lay of the land, see how things work, I suppose. But I'm curious what it's like to kind of take the technical reins of a company like MongoDB, and what are you thinking about as you start your first 30 days?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that as a CTO, I think that I'm not so much planning on taking the reins as being an advisor. As you go up in your career, go up an org chart, you find that actually you have less and less direct control, and it's more control through influence and through being a counselor and through being, bringing overview and viewpoints and judgment. And so, what I'm hoping to do at MongoDB is talk to people about the technical directions we're taking, listen to them, bring my experience of what's worked or not, and guide the company on its path. And the areas we're looking at right now are, number one, we have a mission critical cloud, multi-cloud database that's a general purpose database, and I want to get that message out there. The second thing is I really, really want to focus on our personas, our developers who use our product, our DBAs who manage the product, and I want to understand them. And then I want to be the bridge that brings that back into the engineering organization and really helps the engineers who all they really want to do is delight customers. And I'm going to help build that bridge between them.
So you're relatively new to the company still, but have you established any of the personas yet, or you want to shed some light into that?
Yeah, so the personas that the company currently focuses on are the developer persona, and obviously there's the DBA persona. But it turns out there's a lot of other people using our database. There's people using it, Atlas Data Lake for analytics. There's people standing up websites using search. There's mobile developers using Realm, and all of those people I'm learning about and learning about how they actually can, write modern applications quickly.
Great. So, Mark, I also see that you worked at NASA, and I mean that's fascinating to me. What is it like to work at NASA? Can you give us any secrets?
Well, I don't know if I can give you any meaningful secrets for like getting a job there or anything, but one of the things that I liked most about NASA is that it's just I worked at JPL in particular, and JPL is a campus of about 4,000 people who all they are is scientists who just want to get science done. And I worked in a semiconductor lab, and I worked with some of the smartest people I've ever worked with, frankly. And what I loved about it was this amalgamation of software with hardware with science. And it was pretty awesome because like one of the projects I did was we were building gallium arsenide chips for testing. And we had this huge bakeout machine which had to get the interior of the bakeout machine down to ultra high vacuum, like even more vacuum than interstellar space. And so it was about a 3 week or 4 week bake out process. And so I wrote the software that would go around and do heaters and coolers all around the machine, trying to heat up the parts to get the atoms to wander around, and then the liquid nitrogen nodules that the atoms would stick to. And writing that software was totally awesome. And here I was working with scientists doing real science, sitting there writing Fortran on a VAX. And that was pretty cool.
I was going
The
to
other
ask you what
project
the
that
language is. Sorry, go ahead.
well, it was Fortran. And the other project that I did there that was kind of fun was we were gifted with the JPL's first scanning tunneling microscope. And we were able to write a program on it in about a month, which allowed us to actually take the needle down and work out individual atoms on the surface. And the whole stupid thing was about the size of a college refrigerator that you might have in a dorm room. And here we were bringing up pictures on our little 1 megabyte microvax of pictures of an individual atoms, and we thought that was just so cool. So yeah, those were some of the projects we did. It was great.
So this might sound like a silly question, but what does JPL mean? Is that like a specific NASA branch somewhere in the United States, or I'm unfamiliar?
Oh, that's a great question. So JPL is the Jet Propulsion Lab, which is in Pasadena, California, and it has the dubious distinction of where Goddard, when he first built his rockets, he was experimenting with his rockets on the Caltech campus, and there had been some, shall we say, incidents where things had run into things and things had exploded. So they then kicked him off campus about 12 miles away into this canyon up in Pasadena to experiment with his rockets. And out of that came the Jet Propulsion Lab. And so JPL runs all the Voyager missions. You've heard of Curiosity on Mars, all the rover missions. Those are all run out of JPL.
Amazing.
So we were talking about your trajectory. You've obviously held some great positions at really great companies, and one of the things that I've found is that when I'm working in a really high functioning, successful team, there are a couple of things in common. And one of them I always see is that we hire really well. And I'm wondering, Mark, if you can help maybe some of the folks that are listening would like to work at a company like Oracle or Amazon or even MongoDB. What kind of advice would you give to folks that are listening that that may want that are shooting for that type of position?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I've been managing since I was about 27, 28, and that in itself has taken a lot of time to get better at. But I think you hit the nail on the head with great people. And so when I interview, every company has its own interview skills. I look for a number of things. One of the things I look for is just curiosity, because when you're not managing someone, you need them to be going and figuring stuff out. So I love people who are just curious all the time about technical stuff, about processes, all of that. So the other thing I look for is I look for people who've stayed deep technically. And what that means is that, no matter what they've done, maybe they think they're one of the best people in the world at it. Like if it's assembly language, they know how the chip works, or if it's databases, they know how the consistency model works, or if it's application development, they know everything about the framework. What I find a little bit dangerous in today's world is people will do these 2 to 3 year stints at 4 or 5 companies in a row, and they end up being 15 years into their careers, sadly, with only 2 or 3 years of repeated experience. And so my advice would be stay deep. And then when you interview, show that curiosity, show, how much you love to learn because, we shouldn't be hiring for expertise. We should be hiring for curiosity, ability to learn, and ability to work with others.
That's great advice. That's some advice I received from the founders of the company that I worked at previously, Medallia. They were relentless about their passion and curiosity, as well as that mindset around being open. Um, Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, so I have a question regarding because you mentioned frameworks, learning, kind of going deep into the framework, if that's kind of your thing. Do you feel like the landscape around that has changed a little bit? Because now, I mean, we're talking 10 years ago, there probably was maybe one or two frameworks for any given language, but now we're looking at languages and technologies that have 100 different frameworks. And sometimes these companies are using 100 different frameworks within their stack for their product. Does this have any kind of impact to you?
Well, a lot of that's over on the mobile side, and
Sure.
from what I've seen, you still have to be deep. You still have to get it working right. At Grab, we built this mobile app, and we used a number of frameworks as well. But at the end of the day, we started settling on just a couple, which we just got really, really intimate with. Grab had to have its mobile app work on hundreds of different models of devices, all the way from low-powered devices to the latest Apple or Samsung device, and so we had to get really, really deep. I'm always a little suspicious when I hear that someone's working with 100 or so frameworks or things like that.
Yeah,
Just to be really honest with you. So I'm curious there about
probably an
what they're
over
doing.
exaggeration, but it does sometimes
But
seem
even
like there's a
10,
lot going on. Yeah.
yeah, even
So
10 makes me wonder if they're doing the right thing.
yeah, I feel you. So in regards to going deep and being good at what you do and really focusing on things, how do you manage a work life balance between personal life and being skillful and on top of things at work?
So I'm like a lot of people who grew up with tech in their teens, and I probably work a little bit too much. There's no doubt about that. At the same time, I've learned that things like budgeting hours between your work and between your home, they don't typically work that well. What I found is that sometimes your life needs more time and sometimes your work needs more time. And so the way I do it is I try to work out contracts with my work and contracts with my home for, hey, this month is going to be really, really hard for me at home, or this month's going to be really hard for me at work. Like right now, I'm moving between houses, and Dave, my boss here at MongoDB, has been completely accommodating of all the different schedules and needs I've had. I think what's most important is that you're open and transparent about that balance with everyone that you're with, and you don't make promises you can't keep.
So um, in a previous example, when you mentioned the most fun that you had, and that was with the video encoder, right? You had this idea you sold, and then you spent. Did you say 3 years working on it 7 days a week? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, that is what you heard. In fact, we got to the point where people would ask permission to take Sundays off. And we're like, of course you can take Sundays off. But yeah, no, we were working that hard that people would ask permission to take Sundays off.
Now, did you ever come into a scenario where something like that happened again, where you were working so aggressively, or I mean, maybe that was maybe you enjoyed that. I don't know.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. That one was by choice. We had a bunch of, people in their, 20s and early 30s who chose to do that. Now, people who had, family lives, obviously, they weren't required to work like that. But a lot of us just chose to do that because we were so inspired, to change the world. And frankly, that's one of the things that I'm excited about here at MongoDB is that I really, really do think that MongoDB has changed the world of application development and will continue to do so in the future. And so when you're changing the world, you just want to come to work every day. You just get up in the morning and you're like, what little piece am I going to play in that journey today?
I love that. Whatever I'm doing, I have to be jumping out of bed. I have to be excited about what I'm doing. Otherwise, I think it's time to find a new position. And that's something at MongoDB that I've just been, so fortunate. The product set is so compelling. The people are so smart, and the direction, the space that the product is in is just so exciting to me. Speaking of direction, what are you thinking about in terms of the direction for MongoDB products? Is it too soon yet to start that conversation?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think it's too soon to start the conversation. It's probably too soon to start, I'm on like day 30 or 35 or something. It's probably too soon to start drawing conclusions. But I do think that the direction is going to be number one, continuing with developers, just continuing to delight developers. We've done that recently by launching Atlas Data Lake so that developers can do analytics in their product and search so that they don't have to stand up a separate database to do search. Um, I also think that one of the things we're seeing is we're seeing more personas at a company use our products. We're seeing data scientists use our products. We're seeing business analysts use our products. And so I think part of the direction is going to be making sure that we can delight all of our stakeholders. And that's gonna take some changes to the product over the next couple of years. Another direction which I'm really excited about is migration, making it really easy to get data in and out of the MongoDB product set. And so that's an area where we have some utilities in that area, but I think we can really grow those to make it transparent for people to move their, legacy relational stores like Oracle and SQL Server, move those over into MongoDB where they can work on them, faster and better and a lot cheaper as well.
Hmm. What about the relational to document oriented space? I mean, relationals had its time. It was a logical view on how to store data that, in my opinion, was built with the constraints of the technology of the time. Right? I mean, we store data in rows and columns and tables because it helps us reduce the number of times that we duplicate data, and that worked in a time when disk storage was extremely expensive. Document oriented databases let us get more flexible. Tell me about the transition you've made as a technologist coming from the world of relational, working at Oracle and Amazon. Any stories to tell us about that transition and your thoughts on the technology transition from relational to document orientation?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting transition. I think, I'll just point out that Codd's paper was written in June of 1970, which was, last time I checked, 50 years and 2 months ago as of this podcast. And I mean, it's an amazing paper, and relational algebra is amazing. And what's interesting about it, like you say, is it's correct. It allows you to think about things in a pretty powerful way that the industry needed at the time. However, what it engendered was a way of writing software, which frankly is not often the way humans think. Humans don't think about having things in 20 different files for one patient. Imagine going to your medical office and you show up for an appointment and she says you want to change your address, and the assistant goes over and has to go to another filing cabinet to get your address. And then when you want to say, oh yeah, my phone number changed too, the person goes over to another filing cabinet to get your phone number file. And that's just not the way humans think. And so over time, like you say, computers have gotten fast enough that we can actually have a model like MongoDB's document model where we use computers in the way we want to use computers, not in the way computers are amenable to being used. Is that kind of what you were thinking of there?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. It just seems more logical. And I've found over the last 5 years at MongoDB, it seems like every change in direction that's made, every decision about how the database has changed is made not for the constraints on the technology, but rather for the desire and the flexibility of the developer. How can we make it easier and more natural and more logical for developers to use the data persistence layer that MongoDB offers? So, so how do
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
continue in that path and align the product continually to developers?
So one of the things I think that's most important about MongoDB, and one of the reasons I was so excited to come here, is that not only do developers have less constraints with MongoDB or with document databases in general than with relational, but the company itself has less constraints. We provide the language drivers, we provide the drivers that talk to the servers, we provide MQL, the language itself, and we provide the backend servers. And what this means is as people are pivoting through some big changes going on in the industry, which I'll describe in a minute or two. As they're going through those changes, MongoDB can actually change our language and change our drivers to adjust to those. And so, for example, we have drivers in, I think it's 13 languages right now, and you can program with your native data structures. When I first started programming against relational, as magical as I think the relational model is, I was using Oracle's call interface and Pro-C and all the different ways you could put SQL into a language, and it just never worked. And then people came along with ORMs, and I mean, ORMs or I'm going to speak directly here, they are a sin visited upon the technical community. Number one, they're hard to program against, and God forbid, number two, they do terrible things to the underlying data store a lot of the time. So what's going on in the industry right now is we're moving from monolithic, centrally controlled application development to distributed microservices-based development. Now, why do I bring that up? Why does that have anything to do with databases or the document model? It means that what we're doing is we're building up small operational data stores that sit behind a service. And those small operational data stores want to be iterated on many times a week. They want to roll to production, maybe once a day. And you could never do that in the old monolithic world. And so, what MongoDB and the document model in general allow you to do is to own your part of the schema, protect it with an API, and then have all the other teams at your company own their part of the schema and protect those with an API. And at Grab, where I worked in Southeast Asia, we ended up across a team of over 1,000 developers doing over 1,100 deployments per week. And that was all based on using a flexible data model, on using microservices. And so, to answer your question, when I think about what we're doing to help developers be better, we want developers to stand up a microservice, stand up a database behind it, and we want to be able to do that in an hour and start rolling things to production by the end of the day.
Wow. So you said something there. So at Grab, 1,100 deployments per day?
Per week.
Per week. But still, that's incredible. How
Yeah.
how
And
was that even possible?
so, the team I worked with at Grab was phenomenal, and I'll just give a shout out to all of them here. Um, we developed a system called Conveyor that actually did those deployments would go through staging, would do those deployments, and then would monitor in production all the metrics around that service and would do auto rollbacks. Now the thing I didn't say is we also did about 100 rollbacks per week. But most of those rollbacks were automatic, done within a minute. and the system would just say, hey, that piece of software didn't do what it was supposed to do, and it would roll it back. And so, we used software to help us develop software. And, that's what MongoDB is about with our drivers. That's what MongoDB is about with our, all the things we're bolting onto the database to make it better. Is we just keep using software to make software development easier.
Yeah, and I love the idiom, like you touched on this, the idiomatic nature of MongoDB in the driver landscape. I'm transitioning into a role where I'm focusing on Swift and developing software with Apple for mobile, and the transition is seamless. I take the skills that I have around MongoDB, working in JavaScript or PHP or whatever the language is, and I transition it to Swift seamlessly. It's quite an amazing thing for sure.
So just so that we have a little bit of clarity around the 1100 deployments and the potential 100 rollbacks, what is Grab? Can you put some context there for people who have never heard of it? Maybe it'll make more sense on why there are so many deployments in a week.
Yeah, so Grab is Southeast Asia's largest ride-hailing company. Not only does ride-hailing, but does food and financial transactions and deliveries. Not really well known in the Western world, but it's the third largest ride-hailing company in the world, right after Uber. And 16,000 employees, big company. And the tech organization was about 2,000 people. And one of the reasons that we did all those deployments every week was that we had broken our technical team up into over 45 tech families. And each tech family was this unit, and it had a product manager and a data scientist and analysts, and it had engineers. And these people were chartered to function as a unit. Very, very little top down management of software development at Grab. And so these teams would build these microservices, and the microservices were tied to the teams. And so each of these teams had quarterly milestones that they were delivering on. And so if you think about 40 teams with, 400 microservices and, 2,000 developers, 1,100 deployments a week, it sounds about right. It sounds like software is just rolling out the door every day.
Still, the numbers are pretty impressive. Great. So, where do we go from here, Mark? Is there anything else you wanted to discuss while we're on the podcast?
Yeah, one of the things that I find is really interesting is, people adopting the cloud and managed services. And, what does that mean? So, Google has this famous phrase they use called toil. And toil is work that has nothing to do with customer value. It is work that does not make you feel smarter or more clever. And so much of what people do these days still in software is toil. And standing up a database on your own machine, managing it, that's toil. Standing up a search engine is toil. And so when I was at Amazon in RDS, we ran a large fleet of managed databases, and we loved having all those people. These customers would come, they'd move their databases over, and their DBAs would get to be able to do less toil and more work around application design and development and management. Well, at MongoDB, we have the same thing. We have Atlas, and Atlas is our managed service, which we're slowly pulling all of our different capabilities into. And Atlas allows you to stand up something and get it going immediately. And if it's okay, I'd like to tell a little bit of a story about my journey on that.
I'd love that.
Go for
Yeah.
it.
So I will admit that in my first 30 days, I was in a meeting that was kind of boring, and I wasn't getting much value from the meeting. And everyone at Mongo, I'm not going to tell you what meeting that was, but there we were in a meeting. Wasn't really entranced by the content. So I went to Atlas. I stood up a cluster. I loaded 350 megabytes of sample data into the cluster. I downloaded Compass, our tool. I modified some of the data. I built an aggregation framework which went and summed up a lot of that data and did different stuff on it. It only had like 5 stages in this cool aggregation framework. I downloaded charts. I learned how to use it, and I stood up a chart. I had never used any of these products before, and it was 19 minutes start to finish to do all that. And to me, that just epitomizes what we can do these days with managed services with products which are written with the developer in mind. And obviously, I hacked that all together in 19 minutes. But the ability to be able to never have used this service before, never have downloaded any of those products before, and actually get a graph of the data in a database in 19 minutes, I think is just phenomenal.
That is phenomenal. And I love the story. And I think what makes it even more profound is how much time had you spent with MongoDB previously?
I'm going to confess very, very little. Like I'd never downloaded Mongo. I'd never downloaded Compass or Charts. I'd never stood up a cluster and done real data analysis on it before.
I'm getting this. I get it from the discussion previously and the things that you've talked about. But why MongoDB? I don't think we really gave you an opportunity to talk about that at length. But why MongoDB?
So why MongoDB is a great question. About a year ago, while I still worked at Grab, I was sitting with one of the seminal people in the relational database world, a friend of mine named Hal Berenson. And we were sitting there and we were drinking together. And we came to the realization that our entire careers had been centered around databases and centered around the promises we were making to developers. And we got kind of depressed because databases remain hard to use. Databases, for the relational databases, which is all I was thinking about at the time, remain hard to program. They don't stay up reliably. They're unpredictable. And we just sat there and we said to each other, are we really going to end our careers having failed at something we started our careers doing? And it was a very depressing moment. Frankly, I'll just be very direct. It was very depressing. And so when the MongoDB opportunity came out of the woodwork, that conversation haunted me after I had it. And the reason I'm at MongoDB is I think we can actually finish off what we started so many years ago in the 70s and 80s, and we can make a database so stunningly easy to use that it's just delightful. And it has all those promises that we've been promising for decades about ease of use, about reliability, about stability, about predictability, about cost management that we've been doing. And so that's my goal. My goal is to basically put a bow on my career and make these databases magical and easy to use.
That's great, Mark, and it's a terrific story. So you've given us some great advice on what you look for in employees at MongoDB. How about in senior leadership? What do you look for in your leadership team?
So over time, what I've noticed is that as people change in their careers, they start out as an IC, they might become a manager or a principal engineer, the job actually changes. And unfortunately, while we interview people for different levels of jobs, when we promote people, we often don't train them and we often don't teach them the job is different. It's a fundamentally different job. And so when I look at senior leadership, I try to figure out whether they're going to succeed in a role that's fundamentally different than what they had earlier in their career. And anyone who knows me is gonna be ready for the five things. And the five things I look for are complexity, ability to deal with truly complex problems, ambiguity, the ability to see an ambiguous situation and get enough data to make a decision without getting too much data. Dealing with ambiguity is really important as a senior leader. Third is sense of urgency. When you're a senior leader, the sense of urgency comes from you. If there's no one above you in the organization and you don't have a sense of urgency, by definition, the organization won't move quickly. Fourth is judgment. I look for people who can make decisions. And sadly, judgment is something which is very, very hard to teach. And so I look for people and I listen to decisions they've made in their careers, and I try to figure out whether this person will make great answers there. And then finally, I look for care. I look for compassion. Does this person take everything that they're doing and do they bring compassion to how they work with employees, how they work with customers, how they work with partners? And that means that they're going to be long-term successful in everything they're doing in those areas. And so all companies have this, checklist of things they look for. Those five things are my checklist that I look for in senior leaders.
That's fantastic. Well, terrific. Mark, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule and talking with us. I think we've learned a lot about you, and I'm really looking forward to having you at MongoDB and looking for that bow that you put on MongoDB. So, Nick, anything else before we close out?
Yeah, I'll go with the typical closeout question. I mean, if people wanted to get in touch with you, are you on social media? How would you like people to engage?
So I do have a Twitter account, and that's one way, which is Mark Loves Tech. That handle probably doesn't come as a surprise. And then I actually have no trouble with people emailing me directly, and it's mp@mongodb.com. Just reach out to me directly. I'd love to chat with any of you. I also am very open to LinkedIn reach outs as well.
Terrific. Well, I hope this is not the last. I hope that this becomes a recurring thing. We'd love to have you on the podcast talking about your transition with MongoDB and the roadmap, of course, things that you can share. And with that, I think we'll close it out. Thanks again, Mark. Have a great day.
Thanks very much, guys. Very nice to meet you.
We're hoping that you got a lot of value out of this podcast episode and learned a little bit about Mark Porter, the CTO of MongoDB. If you have questions about MongoDB, you can ask about them in our community forums at community.mongodb.com. You can also check out our developer portal, which is developer.mongodb.com, which has a lot of different useful tutorials on a variety of topics ranging from MongoDB Atlas to Realm and a bunch of other great things. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, it would mean a lot to us if you went into Apple Podcast or wherever you're listening from and left it a 5-star rating and review. So that way other listeners can get an idea of what they're getting themselves into when they click that play button. We'll see you next time.